Hi, should we start? Yes. Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for joining today's session. We will discuss the theme of women in crisis and conflict. We have invited several speakers from all around the world, and we're so proud and excited to have so many people attending to this event. And my name is Mona Gasmi, and I'm the chairperson of FUF Stockholm Södra. And I have only recently started working in this role since our association was established 2 months ago. Despite this short time, we have managed to gain over 100 members, and of these members, 25 are active and shaping the progress and success of the local chapter of FUF on a daily basis. I would also like to give some short information about who we are, especially for the ones who are unfamiliar with FUF. We are FUF Stockholm Södra, a newly started local group for everyone living in Stockholm, driven by committed volunteers, passionate about raising the global development debate among young people and students in Stockholm. Our local association is closely connected to the mother organization FUF, or Föreningen för utvecklingsfrågor in Swedish. And it's also important to note why we decided that this month's theme was to be women in crisis and conflict. And first and foremost, this is because International Women's Day took place on the 8th of March, but it's also because we believe that the best way to bring attention to women around the world is to allow for discussions about important problems that women face today, no matter how hard and frustrating it might be. Finally, we are so incredibly grateful that our speakers were experts in their respective fields are willing to share their thoughts and experience with us today. As I'm the contact person for this organization, you can send me an email if you have any question about the event today or about the organization. Now it's time for me to give the word to Michaela and Shula, who will be moderating the session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the introduction, Mona. It's so nice to see that so many of you are interested in today's session. So my name is Julia Karamuk, and as Mona mentioned, I and Michaela Levander will be the moderators as the team leaders of the event group at FUF Stockholm Södra. Before we move on to the information about our guests today, we would like to highlight some points. The seminar will be recorded and will be shared on FUF Play YouTube channel, where you can also find other recorded seminars regarding the development questions. If you do not feel comfortable being recorded, please turn off your cameras. We also would like to remind you to mute your microphones during the seminar. If you have any questions, you can ask them by sending to Michaela on the chat, and she will present the questions to our guests during the question and discussion part at the end of our seminar. You can also use the raise hand function to ask questions during the discussion part. We would like to mention shortly about our event day, since we have two different sessions today. This session is called Gender Perspectives from Uganda and Bangladesh. The other session, which takes place at 6 p.m. today, will be held by a researcher at the Nordic Africa Institute, and she will talk about the wartime sexual violence. You are more than welcome to attend that session as well. We will be using the same Zoom link. So we are honored to host two guests in today's first session. Ulrika Blom is the country director at the Norwegian Refugee Council in Uganda, and Åsa Torkelsson is the representative of UNFPA in Bangladesh. During the seminar, Ulrika and Åsa will talk for 30 minutes each, and they will shortly present themselves, the organization that they work for, and about their tasks in Uganda and Bangladesh in connection with women in crisis and conflict. As a following, we will have a question and discussion part for 30 minutes at the end of the session. And you are more than welcome to ask your questions in that part. So we are starting with our first guest today. Ulrika, would you like to introduce yourself shortly and the organization that you work for before we move on to your presentation?
Yes, hello. My name is Ulrika Blom, and I'm country director in Uganda for Norwegian Refugee Council. It's a global organization, you can say, working in all the big humanitarian crises think we are in 22 countries now, with the head office in Oslo. It's a Norwegian organization. And here in Uganda, we've been here for many years. It restarted in 2014 when the crisis in South Sudan began again, you can say. So quite many years. I have been in Uganda for almost 2 years now, and in many other countries in Africa, all over the world really, but mainly in Africa as country director for NRC. Started my first year as in Angola, 2006. So I'm an oldie in this sector. So shall I maybe start with the presentation? So I have done a presentation based a little on the disabled participant screen share. Let's see if I can. You have to enable me to be able to share. It's disabled.
Okay, just one sec. So, is it possible now?
Let me see. Yes, it seems so. Now we see if it works if I do it like this. Is it full screen now? Now it's full screen.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I was invited to talk a little about my perspective from being here in Uganda about women living in crisis and conflict. So not much guidance on what type of questions. So I think there will be questions maybe at the end of these two presentations. So this is my take on the situation. So first, I wanted to give a little of a summary how I see the situation in Uganda. I think it is very important if we are talking to different countries to put ourselves in that country and understand what is specific. So Uganda is, interestingly enough, one of the big ones in terms of refugee hosting. It's the absolute biggest refugee hosting country in Africa with over 1.4 million refugees. And also very interesting with Uganda is that it is a country that has an open door policy, meaning that they are letting refugees in from the neighboring countries. And that is, as you know, not many countries nowadays that has an open door policy. There are a lot of difficulties in becoming a refugee and seeking asylum. And Uganda is also committing to what is called the Global Compact on Refugee, which is an international policy. One of few countries doing this. And Uganda is then receiving refugees in many countries, DR Congo, which is just at the west, South Sudan in the north, Somalia, Ethiopia, Burundi, Eritrea. And it is also then a humanitarian crisis in Uganda that is chronicle. I don't like the term chronicle, by the way, but that is what we many times say in that term, that it is long term. What is maybe important to say is that it is also pendular and that it goes in waves. If it was just chronicle, it would be the same. So that is why I think chronicle is maybe not the best way to describe this crisis. And because of that situation, it is then the refugees here, the option they have is look into local integration. Resettlement to a third country is a possibility, but that is more and more difficult, of course, because many countries receiving refugees don't want to have refugees anymore, especially in Europe. So resettlement is being reduced. And return is not really an option because the conflict is still ongoing in Congo and South Sudan. So then, based on that context, I also wanted to describe a little on what actually is happening in terms of the response. So this is, of course, one of the bigger refugee responses in the world. And the High Commissioner of UNHCR, Filippo Grandi, was here last week, and he was saying, we are really proud about our intervention. This is really one of our big ones. But I think it is important to look into statistics on how that is going and how the funding is going for this refugee response. We talk in Sweden about that it's difficult with those 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 refugees. Here it is 1.4 million refugees, and it is 100 to 200,000 arriving every year. So how is the funding going? This is a poor country, so it will be international funding that will respond to that. So I did a comparison here in advance of the meeting. I know the table doesn't look very developed, but just to give you an idea is that if you compare to 2018, 2019 and 2020, where we are now, the funding is going down and the requested funding is going down. So on the second line here in this table, you can see that UNHCR and the government here asked for $869 million for 1.1 million refugees. And in 2019, they asked for 927, and 2020, they are saying 344. So I compared that with how many refugees it is. So if you look at the second last line, PP request per person, requested funds, you can see that in 2018, the request was for $730 per refugee. In 2019, it was $671 per person. And this year it's only 237. And this is what is very common in the humanitarian sector, that when we ask for funds, it's not really a reflection about how much money we need. It is more about, or it is also about what we think we can fund. So we criticized them saying in 2019, only 40% of the requested fund was approved or we got. No? So now, this year, we can also say maybe 60% of what we asked for will be received. Yeah, but that is much less money though. So I mean, the real situation is much worse. And actually, we can see in the percentage when we talk about coverage of the response plan. So what I wanted to show you with this slide was to say that the funding situation is complicated. It is going down and the need is increasing. And that is important also when we talk about women, whoever we talk about, because this is a refugee responding context. Yeah. So then I also wanted to give you another statistics if you are interested in that. So the over picture there at the top is what the government, which is leading the refugee response, publish every month, so that we can see what type of refugees there is, how they are increasing, and so on, and where they live. So the settlement is where they live in the different towns or districts. I then analyzed that statistics just for your information to make it easier. So you can see there at the right-hand side, percentage between female and male. So of course, the first group is just the same. Usually that is what happens. Children usually are quite well distributed. One has a son, another one has a daughter. But when you look at refugees then arriving into the country, it is a lot of discrepancy. So from 18 years up, the number of women is staggering much more. And the older they get, the more women it is. So they are arriving, and that we can see in other refugee settings as well, and also in displacement setting, that women are usually overrepresented in refugee communities. And that has to do with context. Men are remaining where in the conflict zone, they are defending their land, or they are fighting, and so on, and the women and the children are moving into refugee situations. So that is very, very clear in these statistics. So now I go in a little more on what I think maybe was the question here on women living in conflict and crisis. So in the Ugandan context compared to Congo, this is a picture of Congo, by the way. I was living in Congo before. So in
Försvann Ulrika?
I think there's a problem with her connection.
Yes.
Yes.
Then no worries.
Yeah, we can just
Good.
wait.
It just gives us some time for reflection to begin with.
Well, it's very interesting that so many women in the refugee settlements comparing to the men.
Exactly. I'm curious about this funding issues. Actually, it's kind of a good source that we can ask her, because I mean we are hearing that funding is increasing and decreasing, but it's good to kind of listen the reasons from a person who works there as well.
And I think Ulrika is back. Hey.
Yes, I got thrown out. This is a risk here, of course, that I will be thrown out now and then. Okay, I continue.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so vulnerabilities. I mean, that would be to say, what are the specific challenges different groups are facing? So why are there vulnerabilities? Who and when and what? What type of vulnerabilities? So for me, it is very important to say that vulnerability is not something that is fixed. I mean, it can be, but most of the time, this is related to context. There are different causes and different consequences with regard to vulnerability. So we cannot say, if we're talking about women, that, I mean, actually we got a report here that says that the biggest, the people that had most vulnerabilities were women. And then we'll say, well, that's not really true. But I mean, it is about what type of context people are living in. So for me, very important that it is related to context. So this can be changed. A vulnerability can be changed. And that is important because then we can target that vulnerability, the cause and the consequences. And it is clear when we have vulnerability that the context has not protected enough. And I wanted to show this picture with that. So this is a displacement in Tanganyika in Congo. So of course this situation, a lot of refugees, displaced actually wasn't refugees, arrive in a town and there is limited response and they live under a mosquito net. There is not enough assistance, not enough funding, so there was no response. So you can imagine when you see these pictures, what type of protection needs there are and what vulnerabilities that are created. And what I am saying is that one of the most important things to look at is what type of shelter do people have. If they are living on the road, if they are living under a mosquito net, of course there is a lot of vulnerabilities. And that happens to a lot of refugees. There is no lock on the door. It's a hut, it's a mosquito net. And of course, there can be sexual violence, but there can also be other things. I mean, they are stealing their things when they're out shopping, for example. So you can say that context is very important and we have to influence that context. That is what we do in my business. We influence by providing assistance, the context. And situations that might increase vulnerabilities is something we need to do. So for example, that is livelihood activities. So that can be that you might have heard, I mean, that a lot of risk for women is when they go to their land and they're going to be farmed and then someone attacks them. But there is also other risks, you know, if they're going to work, they can be harassed. It is also when they're going to school, children are going to school. It might be a dangerous road and so on. When they are leaving their home, the risk increases. And then it is many times related to resource gathering. So if they need resources, for example, firewood, I took as an example, there are also incidents happening. So depending on what type of lifestyle they have and what they need to do, the risk increases, and this we can influence. And what type of vulnerabilities and incident is it? Lots of time we talk about sexual violence as a major incident, but it's clear in terms of statistics that it is other things that are much more common, of course. And most of it is, now I'm not talking only about women, but of course women is more than majority of the refugees. And that is harassment, that's robbery, that is theft, that is violence, and then there is also sexual violence. But if you look at the total number of incidents, of course it is theft that is the most common, and violence can be violence as well. And so that is a little bit what I see as the analysis and the framework on if you're going to look into how you're going to address some of the vulnerabilities and difficulties that women have. And I would say on livelihood, for example, that because the society is created as it is, especially for refugees, some women are faced with bigger problems. So how has this developed during COVID-19? How has life developed, and what has been the biggest changes, and what type of learning do we have? Yeah, it's very clear that during lockdown, here in Uganda has been a very tough lockdown compared to Sweden. Today, or actually yesterday, was 1 year from when the absolute lockdown started, where no cars were allowed to move around for 3 months. So we had to walk around and bike around. No shops, nothing was open except for supermarkets so we could get food. This was released after 3 months, but we have still had curfew for a year now and restrictions on gathering and so on. So what has been the major consequence? Yeah, there has been a disruption of livelihood. And why was there a disruption of livelihood? Yes, because a lot of refugees have informal jobs to add on to the assistance they are getting from UNHCR, which is limited and not covering the absolute minimum. They are selling things, baking things, and they're maybe working in houses. They're sewing small necklaces they are trying to sell and so on. But this was not allowed for 3 months. And that business hasn't really taken up after a year. So we know from statistics that the livelihood was cut down. And what happens if livelihood is cut out? Like it will happen for me, is that I have to try to find another way to find livelihood and survive. So that has developed negative coping mechanisms for survival, and the biggest effect has been in the urban settings, because in the urban settings they don't have access to land usually. And those negative coping mechanisms has been in the case of Uganda, trafficking, meaning they are selling off their children because they can't give them food. We know this is increasing. This can be addressed by assistance. It's easy to address this. But we don't have that money. And that is why that first picture was important. We also know that by interviewing them, that they are marrying off their girls. That early childhood marriages has increased. This is also an easy solution to get less people to feed in your house. And then we also know, as we know in all countries, that the frustration and the situation and the way that the societies are set up, sexual violence has increased. And the fourth point that I wanted to bring up, which is not only women, but girls, has a bigger impact on girls, and that is the school closure. Schools has been closed for a year here now. And children are supposed to study at home, radio programs and so on. But of course that is very difficult. And especially for the ones that are poor and don't have maybe parents at home that can support them with a laptop and a TV and a radio and so on. And that is many times refugees. They have a more difficult situation, but of course also urban poor. So it's a big child protection crisis when schools close. And this Folkhälsomyndigheten in Sweden, of course, is very well aware of this. And that is why they argue that the school wouldn't close, especially for the younger children. But this we see here in Uganda and many other countries, that the schools are closed and the effect on children is massive, and especially on girls. So now I'm coming to the fun part. What can be done? But for me then, if we look at these vulnerabilities that I was describing, that has to do with livelihood, mainly, that is to look into the situation of the women. And many times, I don't know, am I losing my time here now? Yes, almost, but I'm soon finished. What is important is that we talk to the women. I think many times it is very easy that we come with ready set solutions. And a lot of the humanitarian sector is filled of experts that know best, and they design programs without talking to the women and the communities where the problem is. So one is to increase the understanding situation by including women, including them in peace negotiation, in conflicts, resolution and so on, but also in response, what type of response they want and what kind of help they want. The other one is, and I think that is important for my sector, is that what is different from development aid and humanitarian aid is speed and scale. Humanitarians know that we need to do things fast and furious and for many. Yeah, so if we have 1.4 million refugees, we have to have a response that has the right scale. So you can't choose 3 girls and do something. It has to be the right scale. And to do that, our design has been very standardized. There are forms where we fill in and measure people and just decide without talking to them. And that is what I think is the future and the challenges, but there are solutions with digital solutions now. And that is to ensure speed and scale, and at the same time have a diverse response. And the third one is to empower women by providing them with choices to fulfill their dreams. And this starts by ensuring access to education. So if we look at how we are responding in many sectors, we are saying, okay, it's good if we have 50-50, 50% girls and 50 men or boys in a school. But we know that the women are many more, so it should be, of course, many more women that we respond to. That is what this picture would then illustrate. They need a chance. If they didn't take it when they were young, if they missed out school, there needs to be a catch-up program, like Komvux and all this that you have in Sweden. I mean, they exist, but they are badly funded, yeah? And then I want to conclude with this one. So this is an example of what you can do in the new environment where digital is possible. So don't think that in a refugee settlement in the northern Uganda that you can't have a digital program. We have a digital training with Arizona University in the settlement in the north. And here is an interview that is on our webpage that I just pasted in. And it's Adu here who wants to study computer science. And there's an example where we ask Adao, what do you want to do with your life? Just like I would have liked someone to ask me when I was a young girl, what do you want to do with your life? What do you want to become where you are when you are an adult, and not have humanitarian experts providing tailoring classes and hairdressing classes for all women. And I think that is where the digital shift can happen, and we can empower women to take part in society, and that will actually change the situation a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. It was really interesting to hear your experiences and the country-specific information that you provided to us on this topic. I'm sure we will get some interesting questions later on the Q&A part. And now I'm glad to give the word to Åsa. Åsa, would you like to start by introducing yourself shortly and the organization that you work for before we move on to your presentation?
Hey, allihopa. Good evening from Bangladesh. My name is Åsa Torkelsson. Thank you, Mona. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this. And thank you for actually deciding to spend your time to listen to our experiences. You could have done many other things, but you have decided to come, and I'm really glad about that. So I am the representative of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. We call ourselves the UN Reproductive Health Agency. And we have a very clear agenda. No nonsense, no diversions. It's to really meet 3 zeros. The one is to eliminate any preventable maternal death. The second one is to end unmet need for family planning. And the third one, and it's a huge one, it's to eliminate gender-based violence. So we have field presences, offices. Our headquarters is in New York. We have a presence pretty much where UN is all over the world. And we do development program as well as humanitarian responses where that is required. So just also as Ulrika was backtracking a bit where she came from, my career or my work in the development space started in the last century in 1998 when I had my first salaried job as a junior professional officer in a regional program based in Zimbabwe, Harare, covering 5 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. Before that, I had also done volunteering pretty much the way Mona was describing, and I'm sure many of you have the experiences to do. I worked in elderly people's home, and then I tried to do volunteering, subsidizing what interested, what drove me, my passion to change the world, and by doing different jobs to be able to do that. I come from a suburb in Stockholm, and I really was very keen on working. I wanted to do something in the world, and then I realized that I needed some education. So I sort of went to do my university studies because I understood that that was pretty much an essential tool to even get the sort of driving license to come out and be a player. And then I've been doing it a little bit like that. I've been doing my studies, then I went to work, and then I realized that I plateaued at the level of, you know, in terms of my responsibilities. And then I went back to do a master. I went back to do more work, take on more responsibilities. And then I realized I couldn't progress, or I needed more tools, more skills. And then I went back and I did a PhD, and I've been continuing to just work and learn, reflect, and so on. So I've done a couple of rounds too at Nordiska Afrika Institutet, and I see Angela's going to come later. And I have been very fortunate to have had the opportunity to do parts of my thesis written there in their libraries. So you really have with you today some peers, if you wish, mentors, if you like, who you can feel free to reach out to for any suggestions that you may have going forward. But just to say, I don't have a presentation actually. I was just intending to talk to you, and I'm going to be vigilant to see if you are raising your hands. I'm going to be very glad to then sort of slow down and explain things. I have my half an hour. I hope I'm going to be using it wisely. But so what I was planning to do for this task on talking about conflict and crisis is to talk from a UNFPA Bangladesh perspective on a couple of conflicts or crises that we are managing in the country. One is, of course, what I think you know is a familiar challenge, the humanitarian response to the Rohingya refugees that are also about the 1 million, one of the world's largest responses, who came in the course of just a few months in 2017 to Bangladesh from neighboring Myanmar. And many had been exposed to unspeakable traumas, also sexual violence. And as UNFPA, we set up to respond to that very rapidly then starting in August 2017. The other, I would say, more, Ulrika said chronic, we wouldn't like the term chronic, but let's say the recurrent climatic variations in Bangladesh, which is one of the world's most vulnerable countries in terms of the climate stressors, is also creating challenges, particularly for women and girls, to cope under these circumstances. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we do that. And the third area is, of course, I mean, we can see COVID having been a real disruptor and a kind of a crisis trigger, an amplifier of existing inequalities, which already, as you can imagine, were biased against women as a starting point. So those are the three areas of crisis or conflict that I wanted to talk about. But in doing so, I want to also emphasize our role to reverse that coin in how we are trying to build peace, which I think is the opposite of conflict, and to solicitate development, which is also the other side of crisis. So in UNFPA, we have a really quite substantive operation. It's one of UNFPA's largest country programs. And we are leveraging, as I said, results towards our 3 zeros, which we think are quite strategic to meet the Sustainable Development Goal targets. Let me just make a quick check to see how many of you are very familiar with the SDGs. Maybe you can raise your hands. Okay, good. So, and someone made thumbs up, great. It seems that we are pretty much on the same page on that. How many of you see like quite clearly and know the link between women's and girls' reproductive health and rights and acceleration towards the SDGs? Is that something that is known in this group? Yeah, I get quite a few thumbs up. So indeed, I mean, what is happening, just to backtrack, in Bangladesh is we have one of the South Asia's highest rates of child marriage. About 50% of girls are married before the age of 18, and about 22% before 15. And these numbers, as you can very well imagine, with COVID and the lockdown, particularly of academic and educational institutions, has also triggered, you know, an intensification of this. It is also linked, of course, with you know, the gap in adolescent reproductive health and rights and sexuality management, girls and women's limited bodily autonomy, and also, you know, painting a picture of a country which, even if it has done amazing strides in women's equality and empowerment over the past decades, and in women's labor participation and so on, and in girls' education, especially at the primary level, and also, you know, the family planning and the sizes of the households and so on has really radically come down over the past decades. Still, gender-based violence is endemic in the country, and women don't feel safe in their households. I mean, the latest statistics we have is that about 2/3 of women are facing, you know, intimate partner violence. You have situations of harassment and violence also in workplaces, in schools, on the streets, and so on, which then is a bit mitigated with women's mobility restrictions. So for us, it's really a very serious issue. And as you can imagine, it's also a very complex one, which has its solutions at, you know, many different levels. There's pretty good national framework to end violence against women. And our job now is to just make sure that all actors are on board and that it will actually be implemented as it needs to be. So that is one, that we have needs in terms of the institutional and policy framework needs, and also hugely underdimensioned service providers to meet the needs that women and girls may have. We've had an extraordinary program working in secondary schools, providing life skills education, which is now going to be scaled out in all schools by the Ministry of Education. We think that's fantastic, which is really training youth in comprehensive sexuality education. We think that that is a very strategic investment in not only empowering us women, girls, to be able to claim and exercise our bodily autonomy, but also to teach boys to respect those boundaries and be agents in that change that needs to happen the way we see that. And we have seen that also as an important avenue to get down the figures on child marriage. And we have seen, I mean, the numbers are still modest, but there are now more and more individual cases of brave young boys and girls who are in their community just standing strong and saying stop to child marriage and taking action, being aware that this is illegal in the country and yet it is being practiced. There are ways, you know, around it. And this movement of young people who know that their rights are really triggering a wave of change and contributing to that, and that's amazing. We also have a new movement of women activists called Feminists Across a Generation, who are really quite angry now. There have been many incidences in Bangladesh of women being killed. And one of the extremely, you know, dramatic cases was a little bit more than a year ago. I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Nusrat. Do you know Nusrat? Anyone? Raise your hand. No. So Nusrat was a very brave girl who actually had faced harassment in her school, and she didn't accept it. So she said, I'm gonna win this. I'm gonna, you know, I have the law in my back, and I'm gonna, and she mobilized people around her also to really take this fight. And then she was about to be able to, you know, get the right on her side when she was called to the roof of her school and she was met by a team of veiled, she didn't know, but maybe peers or mates, and they burnt her, and she died there. And that was an extraordinary tragedy, also because of her bravery. When we are, encouraging everyone to, don't accept, you have, the legal situation on your side. And then her bravery led to that particular, outcome. And even at that time, maybe it didn't trigger the reaction so much. We didn't see the movement on the streets so much at the time, but we are beginning to see it now. The kind of the commonality and the normalization of the violence against women, in particularly also in public spaces, is really triggering a kind of no acceptance situation from many young civil society movement makers. And so we're seeing some kind of change in the making. So please watch out for that and see, follow Bangladesh, and look out for your sisters here and brothers who are trying to, work in a difficult circumstance. And that is then one of the areas. So in the Rohingya, just to mention refugee humanitarian response that we are leading both for the refugees and in the host population. We are providing sexual and reproductive health and rights. So, and also both responding to and healing from gender-based violence. And I think in the immediate, when the refugees came to Bangladesh 3 years ago, a bit more, it was about really just mending the wounds, restoring dignity just immediately. And over time, we've been able to build up a more kind of protracted response, but we are not able to do that long term, because there is still, of course, the aspiration from the very generous government of Bangladesh, who actually opened their arms, their borders, and hosted the Rohingya. But as you can imagine, it's also taking a lot of toll in an already tested country. So the aspiration in Bangladesh is really looking for the international community support for the Rohingya to return to Myanmar. But in the meantime, on a year-to-year basis, and Ulrika explained how they did it a bit in Uganda, we prepare a joint response plan with the different UN agencies, where UNFPA, we are leading the clusters around gender-based violence. I think, Ulrika, you may tell me if I'm wrong or not, but it's probably the same in Uganda. That's commonly a role by UNFPA. So in terms of how we responded was to immediately just respond to the emergency at hand. And then slowly we've been able to build programming which is focusing around the healing and provide a vision of mental and psychosocial support to women. And we started to ring fence and create spaces for women where men were actually absolutely not allowed, with no exception. And when the Secretary General came to the Rohingya refugee response, he wanted to enter the women-friendly spaces and interact with the women. And we refused, unless we had a process that we put in place where the women could put the conditions for him entering, because of course, there was the balance of them also wanting to have the ear of the high-level policymakers to hear them out. And we instituted a protocol, and we made it very clear who was agreeing to be in the women's space under those conditions. And the World Bank president was there as well, and also Filippo Grandi from UNHCR was able to have that discussion. But we've been very protective around the integrity of the women-friendly spaces. And over time, we've, however, seen that the needs of women have been evolving, and we've tried to meet their evolving needs. As I mentioned, the mental and psychosocial health bit is one. The other one is to recognize that men and boys need to be part of this solution as well, for any real kind of safety to women to be effectively put into place. And there we have built in other programming that can cater for that. We have also seen that we are keen on integrating the sexual and reproductive health work and the gender-based violence work. So we are placing midwives in our women-friendly spaces. We've also realized that we want to, of course, build a reconciliation where women and men will live peacefully together. And we've also instated something that is called women-led community centers, which also offers some livelihood activities Ulrika mentioned, but also where women and men are together in these spaces. So that's a little bit on the Rohingya refugee response. Maybe a few words I can move over to, because I wanted to open your eyes and to hear from you, because I think it's going to be a very important issue going forward. And we haven't done much systematic work, but we need to do more in terms of climate change. You know, it's our kind of ödesfråga, the critical issue that it will set the boundary for any of our action going forward. So we have been responding always when we see that we have displacement due to the climatic changes that are so predictable by now. There are floods a couple of times per year in Bangladesh. There are cyclones coming. It's meteorologically predictable. So what we have tried to also do is to therefore enhance our readiness, that we are ready, we have our supply in hands even before the crisis hits. This year we started to provide menstrual management to girls. We have learned our lessons that from other climatic disasters, that's a really big challenge for many girls. So we opened the line to provide that to them. We also collaborated with both FAO and with the World Food Programme to deliver some cash payments so that the supplies could be brought beforehand and people could get ready before the cyclone hit. And last week, I think it was, we had a really interesting virtual field visit from the OCHA head. And we connected him with the people that we serve in one of the poor remote communities so that he could hear how this program had worked. And there were some things that the women were telling us that completely I had never heard. And meaning that for us, we are really learning every day and we need to adapt every day. So I think we heard about 5 women in like focused discussions, and they fed back. And the question that Mark Lowcock was asking was, you know, how do you spend your cash? So I just wanted, in terms of preparing effectively for the flood, to the women. So I just wanted to hear from you if you have some ideas how the money was spent, aside from, of course, supplies and getting readiness in those directions. Anyone who wants to float an idea?
Interesting. That's very difficult. Could it be with just assistance and inclusion of the women and all people in place to contribute with their own ideas, such as Ulrika mentioned before, the importance of including them as well?
No, yeah, exactly. So that's what we did. We listened to them and we prepared for them, and then we evaluated with them, how did it go? How could we change, you know? And so for me, the very kind of shocking thing that I heard is that I needed to have more elaborated was many women said, we went to buy some rope. You know, rope? And we said, you know, why would you need, you know, rope in preparation? Anyone who has any idea?
No.
What they wanted to do ahead of the flood is to have a rope so that they could hang their beds up higher and that their beds would not be swept away by the flood. And the flood, when it comes, I mean, for me, it's pretty puzzling how it can raise so quickly. And I can just, you know, I'm also a mother of 3. I can just imagine, you know, the agony of binding my bed up and just hoping that it will be sufficiently high and knowing that if it's not, we will all be swept away. And I'm just thinking how, you know, living under such circumstances for weeks, maybe months with that uncertainty, how can you even get the rest needed to regain your energies, to do your work, you know, or, you know, live in the next day? So for me, that was sort of a really low mark of vulnerability. And one woman from the transgender community, what she said, you know, next time we really appreciate it because as UNFPA, we give dignity kits, which puts all the necessities we have discussed with the people we serve, what they need for their dignity and health and sanitation. This time we design specifically together with transgender population. And they were happy about the adaptation of what we had done. And the one thing that they said they wanted going forward is we want to have a tent because we are not invited in the shelters. The people don't feel happy when we are coming. So if we cannot go to the shelters, at least maybe you can give us a tent so that we can put it somewhere. And we don't need to embarrass anyone or we don't need to feel bad about that, but we can survive. So those are the things that, you know, as Ulrika said, when we start, of course, we always design together with the people we serve. So we know that what we are providing is squarely meeting their needs. And they are learning about their needs every time. So we have to keep on learning. So just maybe a few minutes on the COVID, which was interesting. In Bangladesh, about 50% of births take place in homes. That has been a challenge for UNFPA because we feel that institution-based delivery is really important to enhance the safety of the birth. So we've done years of advocacy, like please go to the clinic. We have posted midwives with support from Sweden. Thank you, Sweden. Thank you, all taxpayers. Tell everyone we are grateful. We've been able to reinstate the midwifery profession in Bangladesh. It didn't exist. Of course, there were traditional birth attendants and so on, but we've actually created a curriculum. And actually with Dalarna University, we have a collaboration where we offer master education to midwives in Bangladesh as well. Leaving that to the side, we've done so much work to make sure that women will be going to hospitals when they are due and that they have the 4 antenatal visits before they give birth. So we are convinced that that is enhancing the safety of birth. With COVID, it was very confusing for many women because they were getting like real mixed messages. So when we talk about the conflict, it's also about getting like 2 visions and not knowing what should I do now. On the one hand, I need to go there. I've been told that my child and I can survive if I go to the hospital. On the other hand, I'm hearing that the hospital, there is COVID, it's really dangerous, I cannot go out, the mobility is restricted and so on. So to meet that fear, of course, we instated in the maternity wards COVID-free sections, and we equipped all health workers with protective equipment and so on. Plus, we continued to do our advocacy. But in addition, we instated tele and digital options so that we could connect with the women by mobile phones, those who have mobile, because still, unfortunately, we have a digital divide. And in addition, where we couldn't reach the women that way to ensure the safe delivery, we instated roving midwifery teams who went to where the women were and followed up, precisely with them. So I think our work is really about being resilient, of course, to be working under such always changing circumstances, with pandemics within pandemics, and so on. But in addition to trying to be very agile, sensitive to signals, and see how we can always be better at delivering what the people need in meeting our objectives of eliminating preventable maternal death and ending any unmet need for family planning and eliminating gender-based violence. Thank you for your attention and for your interest in our work. I'll be glad to talk more and explain more and answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Åsa and Ulrika. You provided us with so many insights, and a lot of the questions that we had gathered from our followers on Instagram before have already been, you've answered them, both of you, and we can now develop and dive further into both contexts. But first we're going to have just a short break for all of these insights to land and for us to formulate a few more questions. And we will be back in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back. I hope most of us at least have come back. And we really have gotten so many interesting and important questions to ask you. Unfortunately, we're already running out of time. We would like to talk to you for ages. But to begin with, I've tried to sum some of the questions into different themes to include as many as possible. And I would like to start on the topic of funding. As that is a big obstacle in managing the crisis. So starting off to you, Ulrika, why do you think that the funding and the expectations have decreased, and what can we do to contribute to changing the ability of funding?
Thank you for that question. I think that is an important question also, because it's difficult really to know that. But for me, it is that we haven't been good enough to explain the consequences of not funding a humanitarian response. So I think the face of the crisis needs to be clarified. And also, that is why I engage in a seminar of this type, that I think it is important to spread the message in a way that what is the consequences? Yeah, the consequences is that we will have more trafficking. For me, that relationship is quite clear. If there is no assistance and you are in a situation that is very dire, you will try to find solutions. So for me, funding, when funding goes down, and it is, it's also geopolitical. If you look at the funding globally on humanitarian crisis, the biggest funding goes to Yemen, and it's on your news every day. And there is a reason for that. It's geopolitically very important, Yemen, and a lot of funding goes there. Uganda is not very interested. And also Congo is a country we're giving up on in a way. So there are a lot of these crises in Africa that NRC has a report that we publish every year called the Neglected Crisis Report. And it's the same countries every year on that one. It's Central African Republic, it's Congo, and a couple of others, but Uganda is also part of that. So for me, it is about that we start to say, okay, so are all people equally important? And if we are saying yes on that, we have to look at how do we fund then the crisis? Yeah, some people in the Middle East are more important if you look at funding. The crisis in Syria is much better funded than the crisis in Africa. Yeah? So for me, it is at the bottom a right issue. And that right issue I want to push. Yeah, but you are needed for that. That type of organization that you are, bringing that message, because it's a right. It's not a right to have a system, but it is it's a human right to be seen as equal, And why should a refugee in Uganda have less assistance than a refugee in Syria?
Thank you. And that actually brings us to another question that I would first like to pose to you, Ulrika, and then to Åsa subsequently. You mentioned that you both have the standardized system to make sure that resources are effectively distributed, but you also think it's very important to include the local women and men, local people, to make sure that that they're included in the process. Have you met any obstacles or do you think that's a complication for funding, that the inclusion of the local people in the processes?
No, sorry, shall I answer again? But I can start. I think why we have standardized system is to make sure that it is accountable. No? So if we are saying, just like we have in Sweden, that all children will have barnbidrag, or if you have a salary below this, you can have bostadsbidrag, you know. So it's standardized because it's easy to control. And in a little the same way here. So if someone is having 3 children and a five-person household, then the assistance will be X, you know. If you have this age or your child-headed household, then you are a PSN, people with special need. Then you will have then you're in another category. But for me, it is very important to talk to the people and not say you are a PSN just because you are like that, you know. I mean, but then there are people coming to me and say, oh, are you trusting the community? You know, so there is, of course, donors will tell us that. Oh, you are just leaving it up to the community then. Are you sure it's the right one? Don't they take their aunt or someone? So for me, it is about making sure that our system are accountable, but also empowering the people and thinking, I am that refugee. How do I want to be treated? No? Do you want to have someone calling you and say, well, you are a PSN, by the way. So you should, you only have one leg, or, you know, I mean, doesn't mean that you are a people with a person of special needs. So for me, there is always people that think it's easier to do a standardized way and it's more accountable, and that we need to challenge because we need to empower the people and trust the people.
Absolutely. And the reasons that we've invited you also is because the situation in Uganda and in Bangladesh, from our perspective, you both have a unique focus on the special needs of women and on sexual and gender-based violence. I'll start with you then, Ulrika, do you agree? And do you think there are ways to institutionalize this perspective and spread it across different contexts?
I mean, I think Åsa also spoke quite a lot about how the response to women is institutionalized in the humanitarian development world. In a way, we have different systems and clusters and so on. But for me, what the engagement we have here is to make sure that the voice of, I think that is not institutionalized, and that's difficult to come around, but still, you know, that needs to happen. That is to institutionalize or making sure that we include women. I mean, like Kvinna till Kvinna has, you know, there is feministic utrikespolitik and all that, you know, that the basis for that is that women has to be seen, and not only seen and talked about, but actually included and trusted and trained and educated and all this.
Absolutely. And Åsa, what are your thoughts? Do you believe the special focus on women in Bangladesh, is it unique, or are there great opportunities to continue with that focus?
Can you elaborate more?
Of course. So the question is with regard to the focus on the special needs of women in these refugee settlements, and all the important work that you've done with the community centers and the integrity of women and all these things. Do you think that you have a unique approach, or do you and can you somehow transfer that to different similar situations across the world?
Absolutely, we can transfer it, and they are already models that, of course, are then adapted given, you know, the circumstances that there are, you know. So absolutely, but I think, I mean, it definitely has also to be revisited how best to launch them, depending on the context where you are. Of course, there may need some adaptation.
Thank you. And then a lot of questions regarding on how we can contribute and how you believe that we most effectively can help. One question from Philippa regarding these digital programs from the Norwegian Refugee Council. Do you believe that's something that more universities could be interested in participating in the future? Ulrika.
Yeah, I didn't get the volume on. No, so for me, I mean, I think sometimes we think refugees are some other people than ourselves. You know? So, but they're probably just the same. And we are sitting here on Zoom. Why can't a refugee be on Zoom? No. So the type of response, I think the future is just a matter of being there and trying to push for that. And of course, universities, I don't know if you are online at university, but I think you are, no? You are studying online now since the university. So you can sit in a settlement and study on Harvard. And I'm sure that in the soon future, it will even be for free, because you can already with different Udemy or whatever they are called, Coursera and all these platforms in YouTube and or whatever. I'm not an expert. I'm a half expert, but not I don't know everything. That will be the future, and soon we will unleash the refugees to also have access, like you have, to the university degrees that only were given to the rich people before, where you had to pay $15,000 for a course in UK on Cambridge and whatever. But Soros and others, they will make sure that this will be free of charge. And soon we will have refugees coming running and having just the same education as myself. Maybe not, but many will have degrees, I'm sure. So it's just a matter of time. And for me, it is a very interesting time. You know, I've been in business for many years. So it's now that revolution happens. And if you're asking me, what can you do? You can do that change. You will be the ones actually bringing in these people into the global society and not seeing them as different people. So, and that is already happening, I mean, with our friends, with our sisters, and you know, that you sit and talk with people like Åsa now in Bangladesh, and you can just talk to a refugee in a settlement in Uganda as well, if you want. So that change is already happening, and maybe in a couple of years, your university student will come from all over the world. And that is a task of myself, to ensure that they get access. So that is a lot what we are working on now and trying to understand. How can they get access so that they can go to your course in Sweden?
Thank you. A very important perspective. And moving on to you, Åsa, do you see the similar developments as in Uganda with the increase of trafficking as a consequence of decreased funding, and especially after COVID-19?
I think it's a difficult question to answer, because we don't have the same, when you talk about the funding formula that you are talking about. And all the data that we have in this field is really not so easy to come about, and particularly after the COVID. There are cases, incidences, but they are maybe not sufficient to extrapolate and make, you know, conclusive findings. But it's reasonable to assume that yes, any hardship, any intensified vulnerability will put girls at a heightened risk. And another issue we didn't talk about is the fact of gender bias sex selection, which you know is quite prevalent, particularly in neighboring countries like India and China, or in Nepal, to Bangladesh, not so much here, which gives the, you know, I think the sex ratio, we have a surplus of about 70 million men only, you know, in this area because of this son preference. And that is another, you know, can be another trigger and risk, especially for vulnerable women. But again, the data is not so much updated or prevalent. So we'll keep on watching and listening out to what's happening. But I mean, I think it's really great, as Ulrika also was saying, your engagement in these issues and your question and you starting to follow these types of discourses and narratives. I think, you know, we are no little cute kitten who is falling down from a step, yielding zillions of hits and people watching over and over. Our followers are few, 1,000, 2,000, and we have important stories to tell. It's also up to you to wake up and create a movement of awakeness for that, you know, human kind of solidarity, and move away from the easy to sort of digest kind of media consumption, which is, I think, is really developing quite fast, and start bringing back the interest for these important stories. In every click you make on one of these important stories can put in motion, you know, important changes, can save lives. So to get that kind of perspective, to hit it home, as they say, I think that's really important. So maybe you can advise us also how better we can craft our messages. What is it in what we are saying that does trigger the interest, that makes you feel that we would like to contribute? This is unacceptable. I will not take this anymore. And I'm thinking about the issue of human change, I mean, and individual change for that matter, is very difficult. It's almost impossible by our own. But I mean, two ingredients for change. The one is that you need to be very repelled and really not like the current situation. That may trigger your change if you have a very strong passion against something. And the other thing that can trigger your change, if you are super attracted by a future state and you would like to get there. So you have the opportunities to put in motion these two kind of energies in motion to be part of this, of course, movement that can yield the change that we need to see coming. So any guidance you can give to us, certainly that will be really appreciated and highly welcome.
Thank you. And there are a lot of wonderings regarding if or how we can contribute most effectively. If you believe that it's contributing from an academic perspective, or as you mentioned with Nusrat and the other civil society groups encouraged by young women, how can we support them? Is that where our focus should be? Or are all these aspects included? Do national and international governmental institutions agree on these norms and values that we are discussing today? Or is that where we should put our focus? What is your opinion, Åsa?
Yeah, I mean, we need to work on all levels. Unfortunately, there is not just, you know, one little problem and we need to solve it and then that's fine. And let's invest our efforts. We need to work in all these spaces. So anything that you can bring, and I think, I mean, if you want to engage with the movements in other parts of the world, for example, in Bangladesh, just engage with the movement and ask them, is there a way that we can contribute? What can we do? I mean, something like that. I don't know, but you know, that would be my recommendation. I think it's hugely empowering when you feel that you are sort of seen, even outside maybe of your circle. You see how our Swedish Greta Thunberg has sort of generated really a quite extraordinary movement which cuts across boundaries. So there is a lot of energy in that kind of recognition, mutual, which is also an easy thing to do. But of course, I think it's very important that you find where your heart individually is. What is the passion that you have? And then use, I mean, either it's a passion for something that you would love to do, or it's something that you really don't like and you want to make sure that it ceases forever. I think those kind of passions, I would encourage you to take them seriously and try to inquire on them and try to understand what are your individual drivers. And then you will know where to focus, if it's academically, as you mentioned, or if it is in the policy spaces, which again is a bit, has to be unpacked, or if it is in the civil society movement. There are so many ways, but I think it's very important and good if you start with your own heart, try to understand where its passion is, and then just follow it. I don't know, Ulrika, if you have another view.
Sorry. You want me to answer? Or?
Yes, please.
No, I would say, I mean, I think I think it is important to understand that you can influence by digging where you are, in a way, that if you increase the understanding of what actually impacts life of people far away, such as funding, for example, equity in funding or rights. I mean, it's not like, the problem is not really what happens here. The conflict that is happening here is related to geopolitics. Yeah. So it's very easy to fly down like I have done, you know, and sit here and try to be some kind of expert. But we need many more experts at home to make sure that we get the things, you know, that we change so that these chronic crises are ended. The best way to reduce the vulnerability for people is to end the war. Yeah, I mean, that is quite obvious. No? So a lot of what we do is to not to prevent, but to react. And I'm saying, you know, I want preventive action, and that is to understand. And I think that is the movement of Greta and so on, you know, start from home. What is our role in this change that we need to have? Mm. So I would challenge you a little on that. Increase your knowledge about what is actually the causes for the situation we are in, and why do we have so many refugees in the world, and why are they increasing? And maybe not to fly down here and try to run after the refugees, but the bigger movement is actually trying to stop that displacement.
Thank you, and we will let that be the final words for today. Thank you, Ulrika, and thank you, Åsa. I think we've all learned so much, and we're filled with not only empowerment, but a lot of frustration too. And at our event later today, Angela will also help us find more practical ways and how we can direct that frustration to something empowering instead. But thank you again for your time. And
thank you, bye. All the best to you.
And all of you others, we will hopefully see you at our event later tonight. And I know that there were a lot of unanswered questions, but we will have many different forums, both live like this at events, but also on all our channels for you to continue the discussions and answer all the unanswered questions. So don't forget to follow us on social media, but also to become members of FUF and our local group FUF Stockholm Södra. It's very easy, and you don't have to be based in Stockholm to do so, since it's all digital now. And we'll see you at 6.